Again, I'm sorry.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honour to convene this meeting of the New York State DNA Subcommittee. I'd like to welcome members of the committee, members of DCGS staff, and members of the public and members of the criminal justice community. We have a full agenda, so I'd like to proceed post-haste. The first item on the agenda is to review and approve the meeting agenda. The committee members have in front of them a draft agenda, and I should like to propose, since there is a desire for several people to speak on the partial match policy and update, I propose that someone could put forward a motion that we move that new business, old business 5 and 6 right up to the beginning of the meeting, just after the review and approval of the draft minutes. So item number 4 and 5 would now be the partial match update and partial match policy. This is distracting.
Yeah.
It's quite distracting.
Yeah. Hey Jimmy, is it possible to mute their mic?
Just ask them to mute their mic.
Can you guys in Albany hear us here?
Not well.
Not very well.
No,
How about now?
that one isn't.
No.
Is it possible you can mute your mic even if you can't hear us well?
They need to turn their volume.
Yeah, we can mute. Can you mute us?
And just unmute when you need to speak.
You have to push the button on the microphone. The one that's green, push the button and it'll go red.
Okay. So on the table was a suggestion that we, if someone could put forward a motion to move the partial match updates to item number 4 and 5.
I will so move.
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
Thank you.
All those in favour of removing, changing the agenda, modifying the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The next item then is to review and approve the draft minutes from last time, from March 15th. March 15th meeting of the DNA Subcommittee. And again, the subcommittee members have in front of us draft minutes. I should have said, actually, it occurs to me, I should have said at the beginning that we have 4 members of the subcommittee here, and for the record, these members are Drs. Kidd, Buell, Eastman, and myself, Ballantyne. So therefore we have a quorum, and 2 members of the committee, namely Drs. Bieber and Batzer, could not attend today. Okay, just for the record. Okay, with that said, I'll give the subcommittee members time to review the comment on the minutes, draft minutes.
Move to accept.
Second by Dr. Eastman. Any discussion? All those in favour of accepting the minutes, draft minutes, as the clear and concise, true record of the original minutes?
No, we wanted to.
When it needs.
Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Did you say aye? Unanimously accepted. The draft minutes are accepted. Okay, so we can now move to item 4, which is the partial match update. So let me start off by saying what actually happened, as far as I can recollect.
Actually, Jack, I'm sorry. That's for the next one, what you're talking. The partial match update is just a little quick background on the cases.
Yes, 5 and 6. We moved 5 and 6 up to this right now. So we're doing 5 first, which is a partial match update.
Okay.
Okay. So, did you want to provide some information to us?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You proceed.
Okay. So essentially, what happens is anytime every meeting we give an update on the partial match cases. So to date, There are 60 names that, 60 cases, 60 partial match cases. There are 21 where statistical thresholds were not met, 39 where names were released, and 30 were closed, and 9 remain active. Since the last subcommittee meeting, two cases were closed. One case was closed because a family tree was established yielding 4 potential relatives. 3 were excluded, 2 were eliminated due to gender, 2 were excluded as a result of DNA comparison to crime scene samples, so all leads were exhausted. Another one was closed because the perpetrator was identified through other means. An update on current open cases. There is a case where there's a family tree established yielding 4 potential relatives. 3 were excluded, 2 excluded due to gender, 1 was deceased prior to the commission of the crime, and 1 DNA exemplar is pending analysis. There's another where a family tree was established, 2 brothers are deceased. The majority of the remaining relatives live well outside of the area where the crime occurred, and there's 1 other that's currently incarcerated that's being investigated. And the last one, there is a family tree established, limited information available about a female relative. In this case, it's a female profile, so the investigation is ongoing. So these are the cases that are currently open where updates are provided, and the numbers I provided in the beginning are basically just the overall for the program.
Any questions regarding these current update?
No.
Because we're going to move on to the policy itself separately. Okay. Thank you. Okay, the next item then is old business, the partial match policy. And what basically transpired the last time was that this committee looked at the current partial match policy in New York State, and with some amendments, we modifications to the previous policy, we voted to submit a binding recommendation to the Commission regarding this policy. The Commission apparently approved the partial match policy, and I haven't heard anything officially from the Commission in terms of them asking us to do anything with this policy. However, during the course of our meeting last time, it became apparent that it would be useful to the community at large for this committee to do some studies, perform some studies on the efficacy of the current policy. How efficient is the policy? How useful is it? With a view to either, saying that things look good, or perhaps there needs improvement, or perhaps things are not as good as they should be. Basically, to perform a study, a scientific study on this. And what happened was that 2 members of our committee, who are basically our statistician / population genetics specialists, namely Dr. Kidd and Bieber, agreed to review the data that we were able to garner in terms of all the partial match cases that have been in fact investigated in New York State. What we mean by that is the case, what the match was, what these kinship ratios were, and with a view to reviewing that data and then getting back to this committee with their review. Unfortunately, there are two problems with this in terms of us producing data and analysis today. Firstly, we only received the data, the actual data itself, within the last day or 2. So we only got the data within the last 2 days. And secondly, Dr. Bieber could not make this meeting, and so therefore that would be a problem in itself. So my view of this aspect of this discussion is that we should table the discussion of our studies, of our ability to look at the efficacy of the match policy until the next meeting, which is supposed to be the 27th of November, and we're hopeful that September. Sorry, we're hopeful that the data analysis will be complete by then, and Drs. Kidd and Bieber will be able to provide the committee with an update and with basically an analysis of the data. So that's where we are with regard to that. Now, so I'm going to suggest that we table our discussion, meaning the committee's discussion, until that time. However, there are a number of members of the non-members of the committee and members of the public have expressed a desire to speak on this issue, and I have a list of them here. The open, what's called the open meeting law of New York provides that any member of the public can in fact attend this meeting, listen and observe. There's no right to speak as such, but this committee can vote to allow members of the public and non-members of the committee to speak. So since we have a number of potential individuals who would potentially like to address the committee, I'm going to ask that the committee takes a vote as to whether we want to allow members of the public to speak. And I suggest if they do speak, we allow this to happen, to allow them to speak for 5 minutes maximum time, since we have a number of individuals. And so that would be a motion that I'm going to place on the table myself, that this committee votes to allow members of the public to speak on the issue of public partial match policy, and they be given up to 5 minutes to talk about this. Now, our own committee, of course, we will not respond to questions at this stage, and so that would be the rules. So basically, we will vote to allow individuals to speak up to 5 minutes. We can call them, I can call them, since I have a list. They will be given up to 5 minutes to speak, but we will not answer any questions at this stage, because we're still reviewing this, and at the next meeting we're going to review the data itself.
If that's a motion, I will second.
Discussion? All those in favour? Aye?
Aye.
Okay. So with that then, I have some individuals that expressed an interest and to speak and gave us advance notice, and I have a list of them here. So I'm going to ask them to come to the table, to identify yourself, and then you can talk to us for 5 minutes. The first individual is Marvin Schechter. Marvin, who is a member of the Forensic Commission.
Good morning, Dr. Ballantyne. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Dr. Ballantyne, do you have a memorandum that Mr. Scheck of the Commission on Forensic Science submitted to you on the issue of partial match dated May 17, 2013?
We've received all the information.
Great. I'll be brief because his memo covers most of the points that I wanted to make. In March of 2010, this state rejected familial searching outright. We set up a system called partial match, and we set up policies around it. The most significant portion of that setup was a series of safeguards that were placed into the system, which permitted, after a submitting lab, found a partial match profile, to go through a number of steps that required the DCJS to become involved in whether any further actions were taken. Under that system, if further actions were needed, such as YSTR or mtDNA testing, then, and only then, after DCJS gave its approval, did that take place. In the amendments that were passed by both the DNA Subcommittee and the Commission, the sequence of testing for YSTR and mtDNA was reversed. And now, as the current system stands, that is done by the submitting lab in the first instance. So if a partial match is found, then that lab does the YSTR and the mtDNA. But they do it without any oversight, so that if they find a profile and they want to go further, then they go back to the old system and they come before the DCJS, and they get the prosecuting agency to sign on, and we do what we did previously. The problem is if they do YSTR or mtDNA and they decide it's of no value. And under the system that has been set up now, no one would ever find out about that. The only people who would know it would be the submitting lab. In changing the amendments, there was no provision made for revealing that information to anybody. And in particular, my concern is the defense community and the attorneys who have these cases in courts would never know that that existed, because discovery of these particular items is difficult enough as is. At least under the old system, there was reporting, and you could find out by going to DCJS what had occurred or what had not occurred. My suggestion to you is as follows. I think you have three choices. One is to undo what you've done and come back with a binding recommendation that changes the sequence back to the old sequence. That's not something that is prohibited. You are the DNA subcommittee, we are the commission. You can easily undo what you've done by a simple vote, even within your rules. The second possibility is that in setting up the new system, which is in effect, as Mr. Scheck alludes to in his memo, a de facto familial search system, which this state has previously rejected, is to come clean and either recommend to the commission that we have familial searching in the state of New York, in which case Mr. Scheck has suggested in his memo a number of strictures and safeguards that would accompany that. You can do that by a straight recommendation to the CFS, or, and I think Mr. Scheck would prefer this, I certainly would, you could recommend that the DNA subcommittee, in conjunction with the CFS, form a joint committee to study the issue of strictures. And by strictures, I'm really talking about the court system and having judges get involved, much like we do with search warrants, et cetera, or, for example, telephone records. What we would do in that instance is go through the restrictions that other states have and that the federal government has, and have a joint committee make that recommendation, so that if we're going to have familial searching, at least it will be with those strictures. That pretty much takes care of what Mr. Scheck suggested and what I also believe in. The other part of Mr. Scheck's request is that the data that you were just talking about, that data should be revealed, and it should be revealed to the Commission on Forensic Science as well as for your DNA subcommittee to look at, so that we can all look at it. I am surprised that the DNA subcommittee went forward in the first instance and enacted these regulations and changes, as well as the Commission on Forensic Science, without looking at the data that you just suggested a few minutes ago. So I think it would still be of value to everyone concerned if we did get a look at that data, and that data be revealed before any further decisions are made. I think that would be helpful to all concerned. If you have any questions, I'm certainly willing to answer them.
No, thank you. I think the statement is very clear, and as I said, we are in the process of reviewing this data, and at the next meeting, hopefully, this data will be made public.
Will the data be made public to the Commission on Forensic Science as you get it? I know I can't ask questions. I'll make that a declarative statement. You are going to reveal that. That way I get around the rule.
The only promise we're making is that at the next DNA subcommittee meeting, the analysis will have been done. Obviously, after that, there'll be a subsequent commission meeting, I would imagine, that it can be addressed there also. But we should, Ken, is that right? Are you confident? You think that by the time of the next DNA subcommittee meeting, some data analysis will be conducted?
Some certainly will.
Yes.
And just one quick clarification, Marvin. The commission actually never considered familial. They considered only partial. So it was never formally rejected. It was never considered.
I'm not quite sure I understand the statement.
Just in your initial statement, it said that the commission had rejected familial searching, and that was something that the commission did not consider. It was considered only partial match.
I think the original debate, when you were not here, back in 2010, looked at familial searching. It looked at partial match. But in the end, I think the commission decided partial match was the way to go. So by the very fact that it enacted partial match at a time when familial searching was well known to the Commission on Forensic Science, was well known to the federal government before 1994, and was well known in the partial match policy, because it stated the submitting laboratories would have to, in the first instance, go to DCJS. That in itself indicated they didn't want to go the familial searching route.
Okay, thank you.
Familial
Thank you, Mark.
searching was out there, but it was not considered by the DNA subcommittee or the commission. It was just partial match that was considered.
But obviously, we're in the middle of a debate just now, and this is not the end of this debate. This debate is just starting. I should say, as a point of interest, that at the federal level, there is an initiative right now under the auspices of SWIGDAM. There is an ad hoc committee being formed to look at familial searching at the kind of national level. So there's a debate going on this whole issue of partial match, familial searching, and it will continue here in New York.
I just think, Dr. Ballantyne, that one of Barry's concerns that he voiced to me was that when he participated at the last meeting, it was his belief and his perception that the members of the DNA subcommittee were confusing the two, that there was a belief that partial match and familial search were one and the same. I would hope that that's been cleared up and that the members of your DNA subcommittee know the difference between the two.
I would hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next individual who expressed an interest to speak was Peter Neufeld. Is Peter Neufeld here? I don't see him. So Peter won't be speaking then. The next individual was Barry Scheck. I don't see Barry here either. So Barry won't be speaking. I like this. The next individual who expressed an interest to speak was Sarah Chu from the Innocence Project. Sarah?
Is it possible, Dr. Ballantyne, I could take each of their 5 minutes? Just a request. I know you don't need to.
I don't think so.
Okay.
And another individual from the Innocence Project, Devin Potts.
Yeah,
Yes.
Marvin spoke for me, so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another individual who wished to speak was Chief Pulaski from the NYPD.
Thanks, everybody. I believe the NYPD may have gotten the largest number of partial match leads. I'll refer to them. I don't know, Brian. You have the numbers. So we've been engaged in the investigations for since the startup, and we've reported our results back to the commission. And our position is that the ability to get the partial match information produces a very significant benefit to law enforcement, because studies have shown that people tend to be recidivists, and our ability to follow a lead is very important because we don't know who that lead involves until we investigate it. And so we've seen in some circles that folks are concerned that this is not a wise use of law enforcement resources for a particular agency. And our position is that the decision to use resources to follow a partial match lead, that decision should be left with the law enforcement agency and should not be taken into consideration, so to speak, in deciding whether partial match information is useful or not. So in other words, the people who have to follow up, the people who are responsible for the public safety issues are the people who should be able to weigh in and say, yes, it is a good resource use, no, it's not a good resource use. And that's it. I think so far we find the program to have been very, very successful, and we were very much in favor of the amendment that would allow YSTR testing and also the release of, I believe it's called the EMK or the EKR, so that we have a sense of where, how strong the partial match is. And we followed a protocol, as the committee knows, where it is a non-intrusive investigation vis-a-vis the person who, the convicted offender who produced the partial match. So we've been very careful to use the family tree method and to collect abandonment samples. So that's it. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for him? I know I can't ask you questions, but I'm more than happy to answer them if anybody's got
Any questions? No?
Okay, thanks.
Manny Katranakis? expressed a potential interest, but
Manny's not here.
he's over there.
He is. He says he does.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda then is accreditation lab updates, and we have we're going to discuss Suffolk County, Nassau County, New York State Police, and Westchester County. So, firstly, we go to Suffolk County Crime Lab. We have notification of an accreditation letter with the final ASCLD Lab International Assessment Report. There's a letter dated December 11th, 2012 to the NDIS custodian, and there's a QAS, Quality Assurance Audit. So these are the documents we have in front of us. And we have a representative from the Suffolk County Crime Lab here. Would you like to identify yourself?
Joseph Galdi from Suffolk County Crime Lab.
Joe, do you want to give us a briefing on what the documents are, or?
Well, nothing's changed. I reported these at the last meeting.
Yes.
The only thing that has changed is since the last meeting, ASCLD Lab has voted our accreditation.
Yes.
But we completed in the meeting back in March, we already completed all the corrective actions that were involved in this assessment.
And this is the international one, right? International.
That's correct.
That's the first time you've got that because it came up this time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Any questions? Or
I just got a
comments?
quick one, Joe. There's a policy to retain 20% of a biological stain in your laboratory, and many labs have similar policies. What's the purpose for that in your eyes?
Multiple purposes. Technology can change, and we can have better technology available to get more information from the sample. It also preserves the sample in case the defense wants to hire an expert for reanalysis of the sample as well.
Right. Is there ever any consideration about the size of the stain to make sure there's sufficient for the defense to go forward with that? I know in past laboratories I've been involved with, tried to save closer to half so that similar examinations could be done by the defense. What's your, I guess what I'm getting at is, as you make smaller and smaller samples, you may reduce the chance of getting anything from it. So a 20% sample may not be sufficient for defense analysis. I just wonder if that comes into play in your review of a stain.
For the most part, a lot of the stains we deal with, we're retaining way more than the 20%.
Yeah.
It's just on occasion of an extremely small stain where this would come into play. Yes, there is that potential, but that's just the policy that we had set. This policy's been in place for quite a number of years.
Yeah. Just one follow-up. If you're going to consume a sample, do you get permission from the submitting agency or the prosecuting attorney?
Yes,
or anything?
we request a memo from a supervisor in the district attorney's office, bureau chief.
And I see you were given grief by the auditors regarding the HemaTrace situation where you were saying it was a confirmatory test for blood, but they wanted it to be downgraded to a presumptive test.
Right, and that wording was in the manual, but we never used that wording in our reports. It's just the title of that section said confirmatory test for human blood. We now call it HemaTrace test for blood.
Yeah. Is it a confirmatory test for human blood?
No, because of cross-reactivity with ferrets and higher primates.
So it's ferrets, primates, or humans committed to
That's our concern.
Skunks and weasels.
skunks and weasels, yeah, the ferret family. Actually, we're actually required here to consider a vote for continuing accreditation of Suffolk County Crime Lab based upon our review of the documents we have in front of us. So we're going to have to take a vote.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah,
To Joe? So there's I have a potential motion here regarding making a binding recommendation to grant Suffolk County Crime Lab accreditation. So, at the June 7th, this is a potential motion, okay? At the June 7th, 2013 New York State DNA Subcommittee meeting, the DNA Subcommittee voted to make a binding recommendation to grant the Suffolk County Crime Lab, New York State, accreditation for the discipline of biology, based upon a review of the ASCLD lab and quality assurance audit for forensic DNA laboratories conducted during the period October 21-26, 2012. This approval will run concurrent with the ASCLD lab cycle, which will run from April 10th, 2013 through April 9th, 2018. So, it's a motion.
I'll move the motion.
Move the motion, good.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Congratulations, Joe.
Thank you.
So the next laboratory under consideration is the Nassau County Office of Medical Examiner, Division of Forensic Services. And we have a letter dated May the 20th from ASCLD Lab approving continuation of accreditation, and a final ASCLD Lab International surveillance visit report dated May 20th, 2013. We have a representative from Nassau County here. Could you state your name and
Karen Dooling, Nassau County ME.
yes, and position in the lab?
Assistant Director.
Assistant Director. Thank you, Karen. Is there anything you'd like to say, Karen? Any updates or anything you'd like to say, or you're just sitting there waiting? Okay.
Just like to sit here for a change.
That's fine. So do you have any questions for or comments for Nassau County?
No question. The comments in the report were quite clear. None.
Yes. But again, I just note the issue of this presumptive test, the blood thing. There's some comment about the item was identified as blood. The allele called tables and conclusions. However, the corresponding serology results indicated as blood. Is that
In the right page.
I don't think that's us.
No, that, I don't have
That's
that.
not.
That's not in mine.
Sorry, I'm referring to the wrong one. I'm sorry. Next lab. Sorry about that. That was a test. That was a test of someone. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. There's no vote required here. This is just for information purposes only. So the actual we now have New York State Police. Okay, with New York State Police, we have the full ASCLD Lab International Assessment Report, dated May 29th, and a revision to Section QA9 reports. And so we were just given today the full assessment report from the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. And I believe we have a representative of New York State Police on the video link. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you state your name, please?
I'm Barry Dusman. I'm director of the DNA section for New York State Police.
Thank you. So does the committee have any questions or comments for New York State Police?
We got that, I think it was in the email, about what the quality assurance manual was updated to state. But how is it being stated in the final reports with regards to the bloodstain cuttings? Are you just taking that out?
Yes, we're going to take out any reference to bloodstain cuttings from the final report.
Barry, could you speak to the issue of this this issue of indicated as blood? There was no confirmatory test, but it was but the report said it was indicated as blood. Can you speak to that issue?
Yes. In our report, just to clarify this, our report actually contains several different sections, and the result of the blood stain localization testing are provided in a separate section entitled Examination Results. And there we very conscientiously made sure that we indicate this is presumptive testing indicating the presence of blood, but we make sure this is presumptive testing. It's unambiguous. Because of that, actually, you'll find that the finding has changed. It's no longer under results. Initially, in the preliminary report, it was under results, but now it's under entirely different finding. But the results for our DNA are in entirely different sections, and they're entitled Description and Conclusion. The description basically contains our allele tables, and the conclusion contains our match results and the statistical results. And in both sections, after presumptive testing and DNA testing is done, we do refer to the item as blood-stained item. But we thought we were being unambiguous, and but we do see that there is a possibility of confusion, so we've removed that. We've specified in our quality manual that you can't report any presumptive result in our DNA testing sections.
Okay, so you basically made them more coherent. The two sections are now more coherent?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I have. No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dusman. So the next lab is Westchester County Department of Laboratories and Research, Division of Forensic Science. And we have a letter dated May 19th, 2013 from ASCLD Lab approving continuation of accreditation. And a final ASCLD Lab international surveillance visit report dated May 19th, 2013. Do we have a representative from the lab here? Don't believe so. So we don't have a lab rep here, but any questions or comments regarding the presentation we have?
Nothing significant there.
Okay. 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 We've reviewed the documents and no further comments made. Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda. The next item is laboratory disclosures, and we have New York State Police Investigation Center, and then we're going to have Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. So with the New York State Police. So do you have the New York State Police documentation here? So, Dr. Dusman, are you still available to give us an update on this issue of the sperm identification?
Yes, actually we have an update which you haven't been privy to because I just got it today, but we've heard back from ASCLD Lab and they agree that the information we provided was appropriate and complete, and they're closing the event. We've talked about in 2 prior meetings. I've given the details and what we've gone through. I mean, we can do that again if you'd like, but basically ASCLD Lab agrees, and they agree that we can close this, which we proposed the last meeting.
So would it be true to say that you're going to re-examine certain cases every year, negative cases? Is that what you're going to do?
We have a program in place to do review of all of our sexual, I mean, not all of our sexual assaults, but to continually review our sexual assault cases by retesting. We've done 267 negative slides over the course of the last year and a half or so. So we're going to continue that program, but we're not going to look just at negative slides because we think that we want to get a little equilibrium. So now we're actually looking at cases where there are few sperm or no sperm. We figure few sperm are as challenging as no sperm from time to time. So we're continuing it. We've tested 11 of our 31 analysts so far this year. So we've continued that program, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Dusman. So the next lab is lab disclosure is Suffolk County Crime Lab, and we have corrective action reports. We have Mr. Goldie back at the table again. Thank you, Joe. Do you think you could give us a briefing as to what transpired here?
Sure. The first corrective action was one that's dated February 5th of 2013. And with this one, what happened was on one of the items of paperwork in the case file, names were transposed in the paperwork. It wasn't an error with samples, it was a clerical error in which the names were transposed, and this error was carried to the lab report itself. This was discovered when one of the samples that had been identified in the report as matching the suspect had been entered in CODIS, and we got a hit, and the hit was with the victim. So when we went back and checked the paperwork, that's where we saw that the error had taken place. So a corrected report was issued where the names were in the correct place.
Was a report issued, Joe, to the submitting agency?
A corrected report?
Well, the first one before
First one
it was
issued,
realized.
yes.
Yeah.
And then a corrected report was issued when we were aware
Yeah.
of this.
And what was the time frame between those two incidents? And did anything occur at the local level due to that report?
No, it really didn't affect the investigation or the prosecution of the case. They knew who the suspect and the victim were. They knew both were bleeding at the scene.
Okay.
So it didn't affect that in any way.
And obviously this represented an issue not only with the analysts but also with the reviews, technical administrative reviews. So have you done anything to try and tighten that review process up so that isn't caught or is caught?
We did. We took a couple of steps. One is the sheet where the error took place is a summary sheet where the data is summarized, listing the samples that were tested and what the DNA profiles were. And now we're having, as part of our review, that sheet is double-checked to make sure that the data entered on the summary sheet is correct. In addition, in this particular case, the technical and administrative review were both performed by the same individual, which we allowed at the time. Now that's no longer allowed. Unless there's a rush case that must get out, then in those instances, if there's only one reviewer available, they can perform both reviews. We haven't had an instance where that's occurred, so now the technical and admin reviews are being performed by two different individuals.
In those rush cases, would you flag that case so that the report would go out, but when a second trained individual came in, they would also take a peek at that just from a QC sort of standpoint?
We hadn't specified that, but that's certainly something we could do.
Yeah.
Again, it hasn't occurred, and I really don't foresee it occurring except on rare occasion.
Right.
I suppose the argument is that if you're going to do it with standard cases, then even a rush case, the same checks and balances should still be in effect. So there may be ways of managing that, like saying someone else, a second review will have to be done at some point.
Okay.
Or something
I
like
agree.
that.
Some sort of flag or something that
Right.
just allows people to say, hey, we got it, we met our requirements to get this out to the submitting agency, but from a standpoint of internal QC, it'd be nice just to say, hey, we're going to take a look at this as soon as, somebody else is in.
That makes sense.
I think you mentioned that there are no item numbers mentioned in your conclusion statements, and so, did I get this one mixed up with the
No,
wrong
that's.
one?
that's
Do you
just-
think that if maybe you had the item numbers next to, reference name and crime scene name in your statement, that during the tech review, you would go up and double check and make sure the item number matches the correct individual, that matches the correct profile, that adding that additional information in your conclusion statement might help prevent this from happening?
I believe that checking the summary sheet is going to fix it more than putting the item numbers in the lab report would, because that's really where the information is and where the error was made. I don't know that having the item numbers would have helped in this case to catch the error.
Because someplace you mentioned that because the item number wasn't in the conclusion. I don't know, am I imagining that?
No,
I
it
thought
is in there. It's in the root cause. It is in there. I'm just saying that it may have been caught, it may not have been caught if those numbers were in there. I believe that the check that we're putting in of the summary sheet is more of a step to catch it rather than putting the item numbers in the lab report for those items.
It would seem to me adding the item number gives more opportunity for error.
It sounds like they've considered some of the options and they've found out what works best for them, so.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Mr. Golgi? No? Thank you very much.
There was a second,
Yeah, there's.
Oh, so the
another
second one,
one,
yes.
yes.
Yeah. It's related to the first one.
no, but it's a separate.
Okay. Which one, yeah, would you describe what it is? So
Okay,
make sure
this
we have
was,
it.
this was an error that was discovered. As we've mentioned in previous meetings, we've set up a quality assurance database to search for sample switching or contamination. And we are now reviewing back through all of our casework using this quality assurance database. So this was a case from 2009, which through the search of the quality assurance database, we did find that a known sample had been switched. What happened at the time, the analyst did catch the error. There were two cases involved. The analyst performed wrote out a corrective action form, which at the time, under our policies, was what we did. And then I followed up on it. And the one case was corrected prior to a report being issued. The second case, the error was not corrected. And in this quality assurance review, that error was caught at this time. So now we have to issue a corrected report based on the fact that that sample was reported incorrectly.
So in effect, the sample switch affected both the original one and now this other one.
It affected
Both
there was
cases.
two samples were switched
Yes.
from two cases, and it was caught in reference to the one case, but was not caught in reference to the second case.
Yeah.
And our quality assurance review has caught the second one.
Did that cause any impacts out in the field?
No, my understanding is that the case had pled a couple of years ago. It didn't, what happened was there was one blood stain found at the scene that should have matched one of the victims in the case.
Okay.
It was reported as not matching the victim. Now the corrected report has gone out that this blood stain does match the victim. But it didn't affect the prosecution.
Yeah. Would you mind just going over briefly what's in your quality assurance database, how it's constructed?
What we're basically doing is putting every DNA profile that we produce into, it's essentially a separate database using the CODIS software, and we're just comparing every sample run in-house to itself just to see if we find, like in this particular case, 2 samples from 2 separate cases matching each other. And then if we see something like that, so for example, when I found that in this case, I pulled the paperwork from the 2 cases and saw that those 2 samples had been run side by side, and I was able to determine that this switch had taken place. So we've instituted that going back about a year and a half. And we've searched from our current casework back to the beginning of 2009, and we're continuing to search backwards.
And that's purely for quality assurance purposes.
That's correct.
And this one just occurred recently, right? That's why we just got this. This is May.
It was May, yes.
Yeah.
Or actually, it was April when we reported it. It occurred in early April and was reported out at the beginning of May.
That's why I only had one. There's a second one that was more recently given to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an oversight on our part.
Yeah. So what are you doing then what's the corrective action then for what's the to prevent this, to try and prevent this in the future? What's the?
Well, the corrective action was more in terms of how we handle corrective actions, because there was a corrective action done 4 years ago, and it obviously wasn't complete.
Mm-hmm.
We have changed how we do corrective actions, and we feel that would more address what's going on here.
Well, just by being more careful in terms of if it affects one, it should check both cases, not just the one.
Right. The review is not
affects-
complete back
Right.
then. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Just trying to understand what. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. The penultimate item listed on this agenda is labelled as executive session. So I need to ask for a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters potentially related to a pending investigation by the Inspector General, New York State. So I need to ask for a motion to go into executive session.
Also moved.
Second.
Okay, so a motion is proposed by you and seconded by Dr. Buell and seconded by Dr. Kidd. Discussion? No, all those in favour of going into executive session, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're going to go into into executive session. Now, what
A motion to return to.
I think I just reconvene the meeting. I don't think we did.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just going to. We're reconvening the meeting again. Let it be known that in the executive session we took no action, as such. So we're now back in open session, and the last item on the agenda is to talk about the next meeting date and locations, and we have 2 dates set now: September 27th, 2013, and November 15th, 2013, both in New York City. These are the next meetings of the DNA Subcommittee. And with that, I should like to adjourn the meeting and thank all those for attending, and have a nice weekend. Bye.